Spartacus is a 1960 American epic historical drama film directed by Stanley Kubrick. The screenplay by Dalton Trumbo was based on the novel Spartacus by Howard Fast. It was inspired by the life story of the leader of a slave revolt in antiquity, Spartacus, and the events of the Third Servile War. The film starred Kirk Douglas as Spartacus, Laurence Olivier as the Roman general and politician Marcus Licinius Crassus, Peter Ustinov, who won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, as slave trader Lentulus Spatiatus, John Gavin as Julius Caesar, John Simmons as Varinia, Charles Lawton as Sempronius Gracchus and Tony Curtis as Antoninus. The film won 4 Academy Awards in all. Douglas, whose Bryna Productions company was producing the film, removed original director Anthony Mann after the first week of shooting. Kubrick, with whom Douglas had worked before, was brought on board to take over direction. It is the only film directed by Kubrick where he did not have complete artistic control. Screenwriter Dalton Trumbo was blacklisted at the time as one of the Hollywood 10. Kirk Douglas publicly announced that Trumbo was the screenwriter of Spartacus, and President-elect John F. Kennedy crossed American Legion picket lines to view the film, helping to end blacklisting. The author of the novel on which it is based, Howard Fast, was also blacklisted, and originally had to self-publish it. The film became the biggest moneymaker in Universal Studios history, until it was surpassed by Airport. Plot. In the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic has slid into corruption, its menial work done by armies of slaves. One of these, a proud and gifted man named Spartacus, is so uncooperative in his servitude that he is sentenced to fight as a gladiator. He is trained at a school run by the unctuous Roman businessman Lentulus Spatiatus, who instructs Spartacus's trainer Marcellus to bully the slave mercilessly and break his spirit. Amid the abuse, Spartacus forms a quiet relationship with a serving woman named Varinia, whom he refuses to rape when she is sent to entertain him in his cell. Spatiatus receives a visit from the Roman senator Marcus Licinius Crassus, an arch-conservative who aims to become dictator of Rome. Crassus buys Varinia on a whim, and for the amusement of his companions arranges for Spartacus and 3 others to fight in pairs. When Spartacus is disarmed, his opponent, an African named Draba, spares his life in a burst of compassion and attacks the Roman audience, but is killed by an arena guard and Crassus. The next day, with the school's atmosphere still tense over this episode, Spatiatus takes Varinia away to Crassus's house in Rome. Spartacus kills Marcellus, who was taunting him over this, and the fight escalates into a riot. The gladiators overwhelm their guards and escape into the Italian countryside. Spartacus is elected chief of the fugitives and decides to lead them out of Italy and back to their homes. They plunder Roman country estates as they go, collecting enough money to buy sea transport from Rome's foes, the pirates of Cilicia. Countless other slaves join the group, making it as large as an army. One of the new arrivals is Varinia, who escaped while being delivered to Crassus. Another is a slave entertainer named Antoninus, who also fled Crassus's service after the Roman tried to seduce him. Privately, Spartacus feels mentally inadequate because of his lack of education during years of servitude. However, he proves an excellent leader and organizes his diverse followers into a tough and self-sufficient community. Varinia, now his informal wife, becomes pregnant by him, and he also comes to regard the spirited Antoninus as a sort of son. The Roman Senate becomes increasingly alarmed as Spartacus defeats the multiple armies it sends against him. Crassus's populist opponent Gracchus knows that his rival will try to use the crisis as a justification for seizing control of the Roman army. Although Caesar lacks Crassus's contempt for the lower classes of Rome, he mistakes the man's rigid outlook for nobility. Thus, when Gracchus reveals that he has bribed the Cilicians to get Spartacus out of Italy and rid Rome of the slave army, Caesar regards such tactics as beneath him and goes over to Crassus. Crassus uses a bribe of his own to make the pirates abandon Spartacus and has the Roman army secretly force the rebels away from the coastline, towards Rome. Amid panic that Spartacus means to sack the city, the Senate gives Crassus absolute power. Now surrounded by Romans, Spartacus convinces his men to die fighting. Just by rebelling, and proving themselves human, he says that they have struck a blow against slavery. In the ensuing battle, most of the slave army is massacred by Crassus's forces. Afterward, when the Romans try to locate the rebel leader for special punishment, every surviving man shields him by shouting, "I'm Spartacus." As a result, Crassus has them all sentenced to death by crucifixion along the Via Appia. Meanwhile, Crassus has found Verenia and Spartacus's newborn son and has taken him prisoner. He is disturbed by the idea that Spartacus can command more love and loyalty than he can, and hopes to compensate by making Verenia as devoted to him as she was to her former husband. When she rejects him, he furiously seeks out Spartacus and forces him to fight Antoninus to the death. The survivor is to be crucified, along with all the other men captured after the great battle. Spartacus kills Antoninus to spare him this fate. The incident leaves Crassus worried about Spartacus's potential to live in legend as a martyr. In other matters, he is also worried about Caesar, who he senses will someday eclipse him. Gracchus, having seen Rome fall into tyranny, commits suicide. Before doing so, he bribes his friend Batiatus to rescue Spartacus's family from Crassus and carry them away to freedom. On the way out of Rome, the group pass under Spartacus's cross. Verenia is able to comfort him in his dying moments by showing him his little son, who will grow up without ever having been a slave. Cast: Kirk Douglas as Spartacus, Laurence Olivier as Crassus, John Simmons as Verenia, Charles Lawton as Gracchus, Peter Ustinov as Batiatus, Tony Curtis as Antoninus, John Gavin as Julius Caesar, John Dull as Marcus Glabris, Nina Fock as Helena Glabris, John Ireland as Crixus, Herbert Lom as Tigranes Levantus, Charles McGraw as Marcellus, Joanna Barnes as Claudia Marius, Harold J. Stone as David, Woody Strode as Drabba. Production. The development of Spartacus was partly instigated by Kirk Douglas's failure to win the title role in William Wyler's Ben-Hur. Douglas had worked with Wyler before on Detective Story, and was disappointed when Wyler chose Charlton Heston instead. Shortly after, Edward Lewis, a vice president in Douglas's film company, Bryner Productions, had Douglas read Howard Fast's novel, Spartacus, which had a related theme, an individual who challenges the might of the Roman Empire, and Douglas was impressed enough to purchase an option on the book from Fast with his own financing. Universal Studios eventually agreed to finance the film after Douglas persuaded Olivier, Lawton, and Ustinov to act in it. Lewis became the producer of the film, with Douglas taking executive producer credit. Lewis subsequently produced other films for Douglas. At the same time, Yul Brynner was planning his own Spartacus film for United Artists, with Douglas or agent Lou Wasserman suggesting he try having his film produced for Universal Studios. With Dalton Trumbo's screenplay being completed in 2 weeks, Universal and Douglas won the Spartacus race. Screenplay development. Howard Fast was originally hired to adapt his own novel as a screenplay, but he had difficulty working in the format. He was replaced by Dalton Trumbo, who had been blacklisted as one of the Hollywood 10, and intended to use the pseudonym Sam Jackson. Kirk Douglas insisted that Trumbo be given screen credit for his work, which helped to break the blacklist. Trumbo had been jailed for contempt of Congress in 1950, after which he had survived by writing screenplays under assumed names. Douglas' intervention on his behalf was praised as an act of courage. In his autobiography, Douglas states that this decision was motivated by a meeting that he, Edward Lewis, and Kubrick had regarding whose name to put against the screenplay in the movie credits, given Trumbo's shaky position with Hollywood executives. One idea was to credit Lewis as co-writer or sole writer, but Lewis vetoed both suggestions. Kubrick then suggested that his own name be used. Douglas and Lewis found Kubrick's eagerness to take credit for Trumbo's work revolting, and the next day, Douglas called the gate at Universal saying, "I'd like to leave a pass for Dalton Trumbo." Douglas writes, "For the first time in 10 years, Trumbo walked onto a studio lot. He said, 'Thanks, Kirk, for giving me back my name.'" The filming was plagued by the conflicting visions of Kubrick and Trumbo. Kubrick complained that the character of Spartacus had no faults or quirks, and he later distanced himself from the film. Blacklisting effectively ended in 1960 when it lost credibility. Trumbo was publicly given credit for 2 major films. Otto Preminger made public that Trumbo wrote the screenplay for the hit, Exodus, and Kirk Douglas publicly announced that Trumbo was the screenwriter of Spartacus. Further, President John F. Kennedy publicly ignored a demonstration organized by the American Legion to see the movie. Filming after David Lean turned down an offer to direct, Spartacus was to be directed by Anthony Mann, then best known for his westerns such as Winchester, 73 and The Naked Spur. Douglas fired Mann at the end of the first week of shooting, in which the opening sequence in the quarry had been filmed. "He seemed scared of the scope of the picture," wrote Douglas in his autobiography. Yet a year later Mann would embark on another epic of similar size, El Cid. The dismissal of Mann is mysterious since the opening sequences, filmed at Death Valley, Nevada, set the style for the rest of the movie. 30-year-old Stanley Kubrick was hired to take over. He had already directed 4 feature films. Spartacus was a bigger project by far, with a budget of $12 million and a cast of 10,500, a daunting project for such a young director. Paths of Glory, his previous film, had only been budgeted at $935,000. Spartacus was filmed using the 35mm Super 70 Technorama format and then blown up to 70mm film. This was a change for Kubrick, who preferred using the standard spherical format. This process allowed him to achieve ultra-high definition and to capture large panoramic scenes, including one with 8,000 trained soldiers from Spain representing the Roman army. Kubrick had wanted to shoot the picture in Rome with cheap extras and resources, but Edward Moule, president of Universal Pictures, wanted to make an example of the film and prove that a successful epic could be made in Hollywood itself and stem the flood of runaway producers heading for Europe. A compromise was reached by filming the intimate scenes in Hollywood, and the battle scenes, at Kubrick's request, in Spain. Kubrick found working outdoors or in real locations to be distracting. He believed the actors would benefit more from working on a soundstage, where they could fully concentrate, to create the illusion of the large crowds that play such an essential role in the film. Kubrick's crew used 3-channel sound equipment to record 76,000 spectators at a Michigan State, Notre Dame college football game shouting, "Hail, Crassus," and "I'm Spartacus." The battle scenes were filmed on a vast plain outside Madrid. 8,000 trained soldiers from the Spanish infantry were used to double as the Roman army. Kubrick directed the armies from the top of specially constructed towers. However, he eventually had to cut all but one of the gory battle scenes, due to negative audience reactions at preview screenings. So precise was Kubrick, that even in arranging the bodies of the slaughtered slaves he had each corpse assigned with a number and instructions. Disputes broke out during the filming. Cinematographer Russell Metty, a veteran with experience working in big pictures such as Orson Welles' The Stranger and Touch of Evil and Howard Hawks' Bringing Up Baby, complained about Kubrick's unusually precise and detailed instructions for the film's camera work and disagreed with Kubrick's use of light. On one occasion he threatened to quit to Edmuel, to which Kubrick told him, "You can do your job by sitting in your chair and shutting up. I'll be the director of photography." Nettie later muted his criticisms after winning the Oscar for Best Cinematography. Kubrick wanted to shoot at a slow pace of 2 camera setups a day, but the studio insisted that he do 32. A compromise of 8 had to be made. Despite the film being a huge box office success, gaining 4 Oscars, and being considered to rank among the very best of historical epics, Kubrick disowned the movie, and did not include it as part of his canon. Although his personal mark is a distinct part of the final picture, his contract did not give him complete control over the filming. The only occasion he did not exercise such control over one of his films. Music. The original score for Spartacus was composed and conducted by 6-time Academy Award nominee Alex North. It was nominated by the American Film Institute for their list of greatest film scores. It is a textbook example of how modernist compositional styles can be adapted to the Hollywood leitmotif technique. North's score is epic, as befits the scale of the film. After extensive research of music of that period, North gathered a collection of antique instruments that, while not authentically Roman, provided a strong dramatic effect. These instruments included a sarrusophone, Israeli recorder, Chinese oboe, lute, mandolin, Yugoslav flute, kithara, dulcimers, and bagpipes. North's prize instrument was the ondioline, similar to an earlier version of the electronic synthesizer, which had never been used in film before. Much of the music is written without a tonal center, or flirts with tonality in ways that most film composers would not risk. One theme is used to represent both slavery and freedom, but is given different values in different scenes, so that it sounds like different themes. The love theme for Spartacus and Verenia is the most accessible theme in the film, and there is a harsh trumpet figure for Crassus. The soundtrack album runs less than 45 minutes and is not very representative of the score. There were plans to re-record a significant amount of the music with North's friend and fellow film composer Jerry Goldsmith, but the project kept getting delayed. Goldsmith died in 2004. Numerous bootleg recordings have been made, but none has good sound quality. In 2010 the soundtrack was re-released as part of a set, featuring 6 CDs, 1 DVD, and a 168-page booklet. This is a limited edition of 5,000 copies. Political commentary, Christianity, and reception. The film parallels 1950s American history, specifically HUAC hearings and the Civil Rights Movement. The hearings, where witnesses were demanded to name names of supposed communist sympathizers, resemble the climactic scene when the slaves, asked by Crassus to give up their leader by pointing him out from the multitude, each stand up to proclaim, "I am Spartacus." Howard Fast, who wrote the book on which the film was based, was jailed for his refusal to testify, and wrote the novel Spartacus while in prison. The comment of how slavery was a central part of American history is pointed to in the beginning in the scenes featuring Draba and Spartacus. Draba sacrifices himself by attacking Crassus rather than kill Spartacus. This scene could point to the fact that Americans are indebted to the suffering of African Americans, who played a major role in building the country. The fight to end segregation and to promote the equality of African Americans is seen in the mixing of races within the Gladiator school as well as in the army of Spartacus, where all fight for freedom. Another instance of the film's allusions to the political climate of the United States is hinted at in the beginning, where Rome is described as a republic that lay fatally stricken with a disease called human slavery, and describing Spartacus as a proud, rebellious son dreaming of the death of slavery. 2,000 years before it finally would die. Thus, the ethical and political vision of the film is first introduced as a foreground for the ensuing action. The voiceover at the beginning of the film also depicts Rome as destined to fail by the rise of Christianity in the last century before the birth of the new faith called Christianity, which was destined to overthrow the pagan tyranny of Rome and bring about a new society. The Roman Republic stood at the very center of the civilized world, even at the zenith of her pride and power. The Republic lay fatally stricken with the disease called human slavery. The age of the dictator was at hand, waiting in the shadows for the event to bring forth. In that same century, in the conquered Greek province of Thrace, an illiterate slave woman added to her master's wealth by giving birth to a son whom she names Spartacus. A proud, rebellious son, who was sold to living death in the mines of Libya, before his 13th birthday. There, under whip and chain and son, he lived out his youth and his young manhood, dreaming the death of slavery 2,000 years before it finally would die. Thus Rome is portrayed as the oppressor suffering from its own excesses, where the prospect of Christian salvation is offered as the means to end Roman oppression and slavery. The film's release occasioned both applause from the mainstream media and protests from anti-communist groups such as the National Legion of Decency, which picketed theaters showcasing the film. To affirm the film's legitimacy as an expression of national aspirations wasn't stilled until the newly elected John F. Kennedy crossed a picket line set up by anti-communist organizers to attend the film.